Hello, welcome to Smiley's. Tonight we're joined by a very special guest. I am joined by Maura and by author Ian Cameron Esslemont. Hello, Maura. Hello, sir. Hello, Cam.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us today.
Frankly, we don't have very much in the way of an interview question and whatnot. So this is mostly just going to be a conversation about writing, about life, about the origins of Malazan. Generally, a lot of a very lighthearted conversation. We don't have a specific topic in mind, unless Maura does, which I don't. So for the most part, I think Maura came prepared, more prepared than I did, with questions. For the most part, though, it's mostly just us talking. So, Maura, would you like to start?
Fire away.
Do you have anything to ask?
So let me just start off because I'm from India, and I think Blood and Bone was like my absolute favorite among all six. So I just wanted to ask you about all the Eastern influences that book has, because that was just very special for me to read, like in fantasy.
Oh, great. I'm really very rewarded to hear that from you, because I was a bit worried about the whole cultural crossover thing. I did my best to evoke a sort of another culture, and what I based it on was my experience living in Thailand, in Bangkok, and traveling for, I was teaching English in Southeast Asia for 4 years, in Bangkok and in Japan. And my wife and I, we traveled extensively through Southeast Asia. And we meant to go only for 1 year, but we loved it there so much that we stayed for 4. And that was the basis for Blood and Bone, the Southeast Asian jungle and a lot of the cultural influences.
No, because the lived experience comes across, because everything, even the smallest things, like I noticed all these tiny details about the family structure and their food habits and things like that. And it just made me so happy to see such things. It has to come from experience.
Well, I'm glad that it resonated as and you recognized or felt it as true, and that's certainly any author's goal. And I'm really rewarded to hear that from you. So thank you very much.
Lee, do you want to ask something?
What I did want to say about Blood and Bone is you mentioned in the acknowledgements, I think it was, right? Louder. I think you mentioned in the acknowledgements that you wanted to think about university, if I recall, about the myths of colonialism and imperialism. And I kind of wanted to ask, because reading back to Golan and Thorn and all that, tracking through a jungle, I wanted to ask if it was in any way influenced by Heart of Darkness, or because I've seen that analogy being brought up a lot as a fantasy version of Heart of Darkness, the novel.
I for that one in particular, I wanted to do a sort of a fantasy retelling of Heart of Darkness, because there I was playing with themes and ideas of imperialism and colonialism, and that's just a fantastic text to delve into that area and to respond to in literature. There's so much there, and it was such a rich text to play with, and all the thematics are there almost for any exploration of fantasy. It was really suited. I thought it suited the project really, really well.
Right.
So, do you still play role-playing games and all? Like D&D
I wish.
GURPS?
I wish I was, but I'm a little bit isolated up here. And all my time now, of course, for me, all that creative energy and fun has been shifted over to writing fiction. So my gaming time, if you will, is now it's my writing time, and I try to keep it that much fun. So instead, I sort of am still gaming, but instead of doing it with a group and live around a table or online, I'm doing it with characters in my fiction.
Yeah, that makes sense.
On the topic of RPGs, I did want to ask, have you ever encountered any difficulty in transferring the character that you envisioned in your mind or played onto text? Because I've tried it, and I would know from personal experience it's hard. So I can't imagine doing it on such a scale of like an entire series or like 4 entire series or whatever it is by now.
I don't know. I mean, I think maybe it's Steve and my irreverence too. Like we don't care about the rules.
That's fair. Yeah.
was like, well, the rules say you can't do this. Well, screw the rules. We want to do it, so we we just go ahead and do whatever we want. And it may or may not work in translation to fiction or to prose or to the world. We'll tinker with it until it does, if we want it. So all the things we didn't want, we just left behind, didn't bother with. So feel free to invent and do whatever the heck you want.
Yep.
So I think I should ask you about the update for PTA. So because we have a date for the fourth book now for the Forge of High Mage.
Yeah, I'm just they I don't know. I think they pushed it to the spring. I think, I would have liked to have seen something sooner than that, but that's just how it is. So I think that's quite a firm date.
Yeah. I mean, it's showing up on my Amazon. So
Yeah.
So it's going to be 2 more books. So it's a total of 6 books in
Yes, for
PTA.
now. And there are other tales of ascendancy that I want to tell, 2 more, and then by then, we will be brought pretty close up to date, historically speaking, to Gardens of the Moon,
Okay.
because I'm going sort of campaign by campaign,
Right.
and then eventually we will get up to that, and that's the goal anyway, and I hope we'll reach it. I slowed down a bit on this one, but the next one I think will go faster.
Okay. You have something, Lee?
On this regard, not really. Well, what I did want to ask is there are sprinkled tales throughout the novels and the Book of the Fallen about the adventures of Kellanved and Dancer. One that comes to mind, for instance, beyond like Falar and Seven Cities and Genebalcus, one that comes to mind is their endeavors within the realms of the Azoth, which I believe will be tackled. I've not read the books yet. They're on my bookshelf. I'm waiting. But one that comes to mind is Shalmor Zin, actually, because if I recall, you had that setting created for a separate campaign.
Shalmorson, yeah.
And it is rumored that they visited it once and then left and never returned. So I'm wondering if such places will be revisited.
Well, I've sort of dealt with Kellanved and Dancer for the first 3. Those were sort of their stories, and now I'm moving on to other characters and other tales and their ascendancy, their growth, their backstory, their growth, how things went in the campaigning, and so I've sort of moved on from them. But there are little anecdotes and bits like stuck in here and there.
Right.
So we'll see them, but they're not main characters. They're subplots.
Yeah, because Kellanwood is one of our favorites. So, any other books you're reading these days, like fiction, fantasy, non-fiction?
I'm reading fiction that is sort of applies to the current project that I'm working on. So and I'm reading nonfiction and histories as well, trying to feed the atmosphere and the culture that I want to try and look at for the current project. So the current reading is all driven by that, and so it's not, and it's all a pleasure because I pick books that are very that I really want to read and that I enjoy, and so those are the ones that I pull together and look at in order to sort of give me grist for the mill, so to speak, material to work with, and ideas and descriptions and even little cultural traits that I would think, okay, I like that. I could maybe you alter it in a certain way so that it fits into Malazan. So it's all material and background that feeds my writing process.
Lee, can I just take the next one?
Yeah, sure. By all means.
I wanted to ask you about all the sailing and the boat and all the marine navigation things, because I think after reading 6 books, we have some, at least I won't be clueless, so there are my Google search is like full of things like what is point to starboard mean, what does a rudder mean, and all that. So is this all from your own experience, or is it just like, your own interest, or how did you go about researching this?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I wish it was from my own experience, but sadly it's not. I have no personal experience at sea.
That's
So it's
okay.
all longing. It's all wish fulfillment, or fantasy, if you will.
Right.
It's a whole nother culture, right, from top to bottom, with its own vocabulary, its own attitudes, and so entering into that world is almost like entering into another culture for me. And I enjoy it very much. And a lot of the historical readings and fantasy, sailing and boats and the rest, it's unavoidable because if you wanted to get around, it is the best way to get around. Overland travel is, at that time or in those periods, was very dangerous, and you would encounter warlords and brigands, and the merchants would have a much harder time getting across land than if they just piled into a boat. They could get along much easier, and so I want my books to reflect that. Like nowadays, we don't have that in our culture so much in the West. It's all airplanes, right? But before that, it was all boats.
I could have sworn you were a sailor, or you used to sail or something, because
Lots of reading.
Lee?
I'm not sure. I have noticed that there's a lot of seafaring cultures in the world of Malaz, from the Falari to the Maris to the Napans to what have
Mhm.
you. There's even an epigraph
I
Yeah.
think
in Stone
I think
Wielder.
you would call that
Yes,
thalassocracy.
precisely. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, Athens in Greek, the Delian League. They were that's the Greek term for rule by sea power, and that was Athens' strategy. But yes, these are the cultures and that we hear about, the expansionist, exploratory cultures, and all the way back, of course, to Egyptians, who you don't even think about it that way, but they were. They sent expeditions all the way around Africa and into the Red Sea, and were then Phoenicians and Greeks and the Romans. And there were even Roman trading forts along the west coast of India. There was a thriving trade back and forth across the Arabian Sea. It's all sort of not known so much today, but if it's your field of history or if your field of study, you realize just how rich all of this trade was, and all of these seagoing voyages and ideas and goods going back and forth across so many seas and oceans.
Yeah. No. All this, especially when I was reading Stone Wielder, and it starts with all the old names for all the places we already know from Book of the Fallen. Like I think it's called Malasa Islands and Dark Avalital, and all the way the names have evolved. Like, is this all from the like actual history, like how places change their names throughout history, and is this was this like the places in Malazan have also evolved like that?
Yeah, they all these things change, and all of these things are malleable. And I'll even get into that a bit in the new in Forge.
Okay, okay,
Things are you have people's versions or their interpretations, right? But then others come and they have different interpretations, and so these can differ. And we're used to nowadays with Google Maps and scientific surveying and expeditions of hammering down geography and hammering down things, but that isn't the way it used to be. There were all sorts of different maps and interpretations of names and events that were always at competing against each other.
mhm.
I believe even the Toblakai name becomes like Taul Avali or something, no?
Thulalai, I think it
For
was.
Toblak. Sorry, what? Yeah,
Thulalai or something it was.
yeah, yeah.
Well, that might
Names,
have been Steve, I think. Yeah.
names of cultures and
Oh,
peoples change, which is true to life. Even religions may change. Take Christianity in the Norse country, where most of the tradition in Scandinavia was oral, and it was only started being writing down when the Christians came along. And so a lot of the skalds and poems and sagas that we have are Christian translations with a lot of Christian influences. So trying to decode exactly where did all this come from, it's very difficult.
That's very true. Yeah, and a lot of the epics are, for example, they talk about this poet Homer, but in fact, these are cobbled together from many different oral versions, and so it's over the centuries, and that's true for a lot of the oral traditions. And so, yeah, I mean, there shouldn't be one sort of authentic version. That's too modern, I think. If you have societies that are independent, individual, they're going to have their own versions of things, and they're not going to agree.
Have you other than Malazan, have you considered writing any other books like non-Malazan fiction or even non-fiction at any time?
Yeah, I'm working on a science fiction project. It's always gets pushed back though because I'm contractually obliged to work on the books I've accepted the contract for.
Yeah.
But I'm very very interested in doing some science fiction. I would like to do that, and I work on some nonfiction essays and things that I'm sort of always sort of playing with. But I find it difficult to do more than one major project at a time. I'm keep challenging myself to try and do that, and maybe someday I will manage to do that. That would be great. I hope to be able to go on, push two projects forward at the same time.
Like, wow, what's your favorite sci-fi books? Because until Malazan, I never considered myself a fantasy reader. Like, so
Well, there's a lot. Yes, favorite. Well, I always when I'm asked, I always push Ian Banks because he's so good. Well, he's passed away now, but just a fantastic author. His Culture series.
yeah,
It's there. It's sort of like Malaz is the equivalent in the fantasy world, whereas you have his gigantic, sprawling series in the science fiction genre, and he did it very cleverly. We didn't even call it a series. He just said these were books set in the culture. That was the name of his civilization that he was following. It was called the
yeah.
Culture, and all the books were set in it. And there's no sequence in particular. So I would push that author. And the first one is Consider Phlebas. I probably mangled that pronunciation. So that's one that I think is fantastic. Very just not only the concepts but the writing. The writing's beautiful.
Do you have anything, Lee?
We brought up science fiction, but what about non-fantasy? Is there anything specific in non-fantasy or generally non-fiction that you would single out?
Something about the genre?
Any book in particular, in non-fantasy book. You brought up earlier that you were looking at historical texts and stuff. So.
Oh, my goodness. If anyone who's would really interested and has the time, I would say go take a course at the university in.
That is true. That is fair.
And have get set a syllabus and a reading a list of texts to go through and start working on them. And it's just I can't even point to one. You need so many to get a feel for one particular period or one particular cultural tradition.
Very well.
Which of your among all your books, which one did you enjoy the most writing?
Of mine?
Yeah.
Oh my. Well, I enjoyed them all, but I did enjoy Blood and Bone a lot. I have to say, yeah. And then Assail as well.
Yeah.
They're sort of twin. They sort of fit together in looking at the treatment of two different cultures. And so we're in one particular culture in Blood and Bone, and then we're sunk into another very different one in Assail.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was fun for us because he's from Europe, so Lee was having fun with all the Scandinavian lore in Assail, whereas I enjoyed all the Asian ones in Blood and Bone. It was fun for us.
I'm glad to hear that about Assail. Yeah, that's my sort of response to Beowulf.
Oh, okay.
I will admit I'm from Greece actually, so I don't have much in the way of contact with the northern cultures, mostly from an academical perspective. So I've heard of Beowulf. I have not read it. I've not delved over a lot into the skalds and the sagas and the epics, but I appreciated the mention like the Great Halls and stuff. That was very nice.
Yeah, Beowulf and the Eddas as well. There's some of the Eddas in there in Assail as well. So yeah, that was when I sort of my nod, if you will, to the sort of traditional Northern European fantasy setting of so many other series, right? The sort of traditional, what used to be traditional default setting of fantasy in Northern Europe, a setting with castles and forests, what have you.
Snow. I think the difference is having snow.
Yeah. I hope it's not anymore. I don't want it to be anymore. I want it to be everywhere. That's what I want. So I went and I said, well, okay, if you really want to do it that way, then let's really do it that way. And so I tried to be as sort of brutally authentic as I could to that really early northern Scandinavian period where it's all dominated by blood feuds and vendettas, and it's a really bloody period.
So if you wanted to write, like a spin-off, because you already have the PTA, two more stories picked out for PTA. So apart from this, would you consider like more Malazan stories? Do you have any setting in mind or?
I don't know. No, I haven't been playing with any. I think that might sort of be it, and unless Steve and I get our heads together and get each other excited again about some new area or new idea or new thematic that we wanted to explore, I sort of decide, well, that's that, and then I meet up with him at we agree to meet at a convention or we get together, and all of a sudden it explodes again, and we have more ideas, put our heads together, and the excitement sort of flashes again. So it's great that that still happened for us when we managed to get together.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, who knows? Who knows? Right? Sorry.
no, because we have some favorite characters here, like especially Golan, Principal Scribe Thorn, and Golan from Blood and Bone. Like just the two of them going off on adventures would be something amazing to read. So that's what
Yeah,
I was hoping for a spin-off of those. Lee, do you have
that would
anything?
be nice. Yeah, that would be nice. But
I have a good
Yeah.
question.
No, when Steve and you like split up the world and start writing, do you like check with each other about the direction you're taking the book, or do you have to like wait and after writing is when you look at each other's work, or how does that work actually?
we actually probably don't consult as much as we should, frankly. I think maybe part of the secret of our continued collaboration is that we ignore each other and give each other a huge amount of room.
Mm-hmm.
We don't crowd each other at all, and maybe that's the secret. We each have as much room as we want. We don't
It's
feel
worked so far, hasn't it?
constrained. Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't feel constrained by this partnership. I don't feel any boundaries, and I hope that he doesn't either. But when something comes up, when I feel like, oh, I don't know if this is going to work, I'll email him, or I'll call him, or we'll chat and work things out, or he'll email me and say, well, who is that guy, and where did he go? And I'll tell him, oh yeah, well, this character this is where I left this character, and this is what had just happened to them. This is their place emotionally and psychologically in their arc. This is where they are, and then he'll say, okay, and he'll pick that up.
Okay. Lee?
On the topic of consulting one another and bouncing off one another, especially since a lot of the origins of the world are from RPGs, and it's very difficult not to notice the stark difference in how you two write each other's characters. One of the more prevalent ones we brought up on the podcast was Dancer, and how absolutely cold and bloodthirsty he feels in Knives compared to the Book of the Fallen. And we generally chalked it up to how one perceives a character versus how one plays a character. But would you have anything to say in particular about this? Like, not necessarily Dancer, but in general, characters that Steve would have played.
Well, I hope that each time we're looking at someone who isn't a point of view, so we're looking at him from another character, that character's biases and opinions informs that image, right? Mm-hmm. And so if someone is looking at a Dancer or a character and he doesn't like, or he or she does not like that character, then that's the way that they are perceived. They're perceived as arrogant or aloof or cold or withdrawn or or murderous, right, and bloodthirsty. So I hope that each time we're looking at them, they're a little bit different.
Yeah.
Because it all depends on whose point of view we're getting in that scene.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I think basically I probably write him differently than Steve does. We're both very different writers, of course, and different in our approach. So that's just how it is. We're sort of giving two points of view on a world.
Right. Actually, when I finished the Book of the Fallen, usually the general opinion about Lasine is that she was quite incompetent, and she's one of the most hated characters in the Book of the Fallen. And then Lee actually has a quite soft spot for her, and he's written quite a few essays in defense of Lasine, including text from both the series. So when I read Return of the Crimson Guard, my mind was completely changed. Like I went from thinking that Lasine was just this incompetent empress to someone you actually care about. So that was extremely nicely done. Like at a point, I started thinking, did you like pick up Return of the Crimson Guard? Did you like pick up this story just to redeem Lasine? Because Steve was just making her out to be this huge villain. Was there anything like that to redeem her character?
Yeah, there's always a scapegoat, and I think that she came to be a scapegoat for a lot of things. But I hope that in my first three of Path of Ascendancy, I hope there we see that she's very competent, an extremely good manager, and one who elicits loyalty from people. She's really good at getting people to be loyal to her. So I hope that comes across, and that's the way that it's easy for people who are sort of not in power to second guess and say, well, I wouldn't have done it that way. That's stupid. And that's sort of, well, you're not in charge. Okay, so the person in charge is making all the hard decisions and has a much bigger point of view than you do over all the things that are going on everywhere. So it's easy to come away with sort of personal accounts that are resentful or because their own little suggestions weren't followed. And so, well, she's a fool not to do what I thought we should do. So we're sort of, Steve and I are showing all of these different little opinions among all of the officials and their take on things, which of course is very different.
I feel incredibly vindicated right now. You have no idea.
Well, I don't want to give away too much, I suppose, but I think Steve would certainly agree with me, and that frankly, she was the one who ran things, and you just could not count on Kelvin or Dancer to bother with all that stuff. They didn't give a damn. So she had to run everything, and there's a lot of resentment that can come up from that. Here's someone bossing everyone around. Well, if she didn't, nothing would get done. So.
I know nobody can see, but Lee right now is, I've never seen him happier than this.
The smirk from ear to ear, yeah. No,
right.
while we're on the topic, one thing that stood out to me especially is you mentioned earlier about how perspective changes how we perceive a character. One thing I did notice is from like the ending few chapters of Return to now, present day, to until Forge of the High Mage comes out anyway, we have not seen Malik Rel in any conceivable way. Like we've seen his influence. He's appeared vaguely in OST, talking through a scepter, but all we get to see is just how his influence warps the Empire, which I think is absolutely fascinating, but also very frustrating because I cannot draw any reasonable conclusion from the whole thing, which is, I suppose, is the point.
Yeah, there's that gap. I mean, in Tales of the Fallen, we see him in Chain of Dogs. So he sort of appears as a representative or advisor to Formcall, I believe, the New Fist in Seven Cities. And so there's that gap, and in fact, I don't want to give away too much, but in Forge, we're going to see a lot of Malik.
Yeah.
I have not made my opinion of him very secret, to be honest, but I get the feeling my opinion will be warped again regarding the Gistel guy. So,
Well, another fellow who does pieces on Malaz on YouTube, he said that he sees how a lot of times Steve and I like to take characters who people think are villains and then turn them around and show their approach and how, well, they're not. They're doing what they had to do or whatever. And then maybe they're not villains after all. And because we have no good guys, no bad guys, nothing like that in our world. So he was very worried that we were going to do that to Mallet and suddenly make him a nice, a good guy, quote unquote. But
Yeah.
he will. So we'll see him, but don't worry too much. I think we'll see someone who is has to be quite exceptional to claw their way up to power the way that he did.
No, because I think Lee just wants an excuse to continue hating him because Witness at least shot it down because he's
Well,
accepted as
let
a
me
good
know
emperor.
after you finish. Yeah, after you finish Forge, tell me what you think. Yeah.
Yeah. No, because the same thing happened with Kaller. I mean, at the towards the end of Blood and Bone, Kaller. I don't know. I'm saying
Valor.
it wrong probably. Yeah.
Valor.
So I thought I want like he once he kills. Sorry, once he spares Jatal and just walks off, and I just wanted to hate him so much. But by the end of the book, I couldn't hate him anymore, Kaller. So it keeps happening. There is not like one character I can focus and say yes. I can't
Hope.
stand him anymore.
These moments, I mean, as the author, you hope that they'll ring true. You hope that they feel real and honest in those reactions and what they did. You hope you hope it rings true with the reader, and they can see how it fits with that character's place psychologically and emotionally. I really hope that those moments ring true.
Yeah. But I just wanted to ask you because I enjoy all the epigraphs in all your books. Because each one, the entire epigraphs themselves tell a completely, a different narrative. It has a different story, and it's usually picked from one single source or so. Assail didn't have epigraphs, and Lee had an in-world explanation for that because it's an oral tradition type of a continent or something. So, do you want to tell us, like, because I really started missing the epigraphs when I started Assail.
Well, it's a tradition. It's it's sort of a lost tradition. And you go back to, say, the 1800s, 1700s, you often have these little brief introductions to each paragraph. They're a paragraph, but they're introductions to the chapter. And sometimes all they do is they just tell you what's about to happen. Actually, they'll say, in which so-and-so does so-and-so and meets so-and-so. And before each chapter. Or as what Steve was doing and what we decided to do for the books was to try and tell a little thing that gives a clue about the thematics of the chapter that's coming.
Yeah,
and
because
it was exhausting. I have to say, it was quite difficult. So I've sort of it's fallen away. I'm not doing it for
okay.
the Tales of Ascendancy. We're not doing that so much.
Okay.
Though on the topic of Assail, I did notice that a lot of the epigraphs are done by Fisher in the chapters because you have a few characters just asking him to just compose on the spot, and he just starts singing something about like Coots or about how they're gonna fall and they're not gonna see tomorrow, and it's like this is the epigraph you're looking for. These oral traditions of these people, and not just Fisher, but all the Icebloods, all the Northerners, or everyone on that continent basically has some mention of an oral tradition, and that is precisely where the epigraphs of sorts that we're missing, because even in Blood and Bone, which we brought up quite a few times, most of the epigraphs are from outsiders, from travelers, from explorers, from sailors, from marooned people, not from the indigenous population of the area from which we see their culture in the chapter, rather than from an epigraph. Mm-hmm. So that was my explanation for why there are no epigraphs in Assail, because you don't need them when in the chapter there is poetry and oral tradition from these individuals to give you a vague hint of what's happening.
It's a good point, especially with Blood and Bone, it's the confrontation between, of course, it's the literate society versus the non-literate, mm-hmm. right? And so in a written tradition, yes, you have the written tradition culture story, their version of things, and but the oral tradition is lost in a you don't get that in that written version. That's a terrible loss. But you have to, going back, you have to keep in mind that bias and keep in mind that you're getting only one side of the story. That's all you're getting. You have to read between the lines to try and get the other story.
We had very similar type of epigraphs even in Stone Wielder, when all the people come with flaming swords of enlightenment and enlightened their local population and things like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I wish
So
I
that's what
could keep feeding on that. That's
no, I
I love.
didn't expect I would start missing epigraphs, because at some point you start thinking it's just where's the actual chapter, where's the story. But I sort of got used to it probably after reading so much Malazan, that I need an epigraph to start a story, to start a chapter. Yeah, sorry, did I interrupt you?
No. Oh no, that's great. I would like to maybe maybe you will put in some.
So I don't think I can. I don't know if I'll get a proper answer, but Jethis from Assail, is it supposed to
Sorry,
be
from.
Spinach? From Assail, Jethis, the mystery Tystandi,
Mhm.
who washes up and Fisher finds him and all that. He is supposed to be Spinach, isn't it? Like,
Well, you see, this is originally when we gamed. That was Animanderas. That was Rake.
okay,
And when we played the game, that's how it was. And then when I was doing the project, I had that in mind for originally. But Steve and I met and we were talking, and what had been coming up in so far in Tales of Book of the Fallen was that characters are coming back to life. From a reader's point of view, they were saying, "Why are all these characters coming back to life? It's like a cheat." And if you look carefully, though, you see that they don't really come back to life. They're they
yeah,
might
yeah,
reappear and have a voice, but they're ghosts, or they are flawed. They're this pale reflections of what they used to be, and then they sort of go away. And so I was worried that I would be taking away from the emotional impact of his death, of Rake's sacrifice, if he came back. And so Steve and I talked about that, and he was quite supportive. He said, if you want to do it, and it's not a problem. But I thought that the readers would maybe not react well, and they would feel that all the emotion that they felt at that moment was being undercut. So I decided to go with a different Tyson. And yes, and so I threw some clues in about the games that he plays and his few other things about standing in for another character, which he does, and so pointing through a few clues to Spinner.
yeah. No, my other theory was that it was one of Rake's children from Drift Valley, because
Mm,
some of the clues sort of line up. There was a gate, there was fighting at a gate, and he's lost at sea and all that. So that was my second theory.
mm,
Um,
could have been.
yeah. No, but it was the Keftanar mention and the Barrow, that sort of seals. Visiting the Barrow at Black Coral, when when Jethis mentions that he's going to go back there, and that's when
Mm,
you sort of realize that it has to be Spinach.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a few
Lee?
clues.
So on the topic of,
Yeah.
Jethus, one thing I particularly liked about Jethus is that his identity is not revealed in the book, and that he goes at the very end like, "My old name doesn't matter. I am Jethus, and about the title, Son of Darkness, we will see if I'm proven worthy." And I really like that because a lot of people didn't, more included apparently because she asked. I I wanted it to be Spinnock. I kind of felt like it was meant to be Spinnock, but I realized that it didn't matter. Like the character himself knew, and he wouldn't share because what I took away from this as a story is that it doesn't matter who you were, but your actions that define you in the future. And yes, his past standing, his friendship with Sir Daman, or his friendship with Rake, or whomever, is very important, but his actions from here on are going to be what define him, punctuated perhaps by his role as the Son of Darkness, which, since his people are going to need a new protector now that Rake's gone, it's his turn to now fill in the gap. And it doesn't matter who he was in the past, it matters who he is now. And it's going to be Jethis that's going to be known as the Son of Darkness, not Spinnock the Rav or whatever. So I quite like that. And I do like to be vindicated that it is indeed Spinnock. I like that a lot.
I think that's
But
a good point. You're right. Really, what's more important is who he is now and who he will be. And the moment that he sort of washes up and is found in the boat, he's now a new person, right? And can recreate himself. That's something that occurs quite often, actually, in the series. People have people should see that they have the choice, that they can reinvent themselves if they want.
Uh, just one question, like from Orb Scepter Throne, we see Orchid, the the Thai Sandy young woman, or not young woman, obviously, because she's been having generations of teachers. But yeah, she's part Eleint. She's a daughter of an Eleint and a daughter of darkness. So one of the theories is that is she like Rake and Silana's kid or something? Is there any like backstory to Orchid?
Um, um, are we talking about the daughters of Ozark? Yeah.
No, no, no,
There's
no.
no, no.
Uh, is she? Doesn't
the Thai
that's
standee at the
quite
spawns in Our Separate Throne.
So we're talking about the Thai Sandy, not
yeah, yeah.
not the Thai
Not
Stidure.
spite. No,
Well, I don't know. It's been a while.
no. That's fair. That's fair. Like one of the theories was that because she's welcomed as both daughter of Dark and daughter of Elaine. So we were just wondering if she's
Mm,
some Rake's child or something. So
right. Um,
yeah,
yeah. Perhaps having blood from both, or having
yeah,
made that shift in power to shape change into being soul taken, being able to shift into dragon form. There's different ways to or paths, if you will, to achieve that.
yeah. Lee?
I don't. Since we're on the topic of Orchid again, one thing I really liked about the Spawn storyline is how it's framed through the perspective of Ansi, who can't see shit. And how a lot of the storyline is self doubt and how he doesn't feel like he's doing his job and how he's gonna imminently die, and it very closely resembles, I think, it punctuates a lot of Vance's strengths as a character. That he is Ansi. He is scared for his life constantly. He's very paranoid. He, but then the perspective changes, like Corian or Orchid herself, or I don't know, his friends, the Bridgeburners, and they're like, "No, dude, they need you here. This guy hasn't jumped us because he's scared of you and whatnot." And since we're here on the spawns, another theory is that Malachi, the thief, is meant to be Cutter. Do you want to confirm this, or maybe? Again, I personally think it's better if we don't know. But
Yeah, I'm not going to fill in all the blanks here,
okay,
but yeah, that was early on, and we were playing with a lot of different options, and as we're trying to keep things open for ourselves. And yeah, I was asked when Steve and I were in France on the book tour. I was asked by one interviewer, "Can you please sort of nail down Wu for me? I mean, is he an
Oh yeah,
actually
yeah.
brilliant magic user genius, or is he just a buffoon who's just pretending?" And I said,
Yeah.
"No, I'm not going to I'm not going to tell you that. It's because it's all sort of in the eye of the beholder. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so you can decide yourself how much of one thing or the other he might be."
Yeah, yeah.
I love that
So
ambiguity.
again, yeah. Well, speaking of ambiguity, I think I don't expect an answer here, but I'll still ask: who or what is Edgewalker?
Oh
Edgewalker.
my goodness, I can't give that away. Steve would get very mad at me, I think.
I had to ask.
Yeah,
well,
Okay.
but I think that can come out. I'll have to clear it with him first, though, so we can talk about that because he's an important guy, and I'm not sure if Steve's finished with him yet. So I'll have to settle that with him first before we can talk more plainly about Edgewalker.
and I think
Okay.
it was Knives that was his first appearance in the chronology, right? Because that came out before the
Mm-hmm.
Bone Hunters.
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah. So he goes way back.
Yeah, I read Knives before I read the Bone Hunters, and I was just like, "Holy shit, who is this guy?" Then he appears again, and I'm just okay. Well, I can definitely see where the confusion's coming from, but I really like these sort of characters. These well, he describes himself as an elemental force. These unknowns, these unknown unknowns. Quite how powerful is he? Don't know. Who is he? No idea. How important is he? Also don't know. And it's that ambiguity that is a driving force, but also the fact that he's really powerful because everyone else fears him. And the perspective we view him through is like we either see him through like with Merc and Sour that describe him as like the scariest motherfucker you've ever met or something, or Kiska who like views him somewhat like in a scared way, but also she doesn't know who she's looking at because she's not a magic user like Merc and Sour are, at least not want to pursue it. And then you have Kelvin and Dancer who just view him either as a nuisance or someone like way above their pay grade. I'm gonna leave this guy right there for later, and I'm gonna deal with him sometime that isn't now because I am not prepared to deal with this. So
yeah, I like
again,
it.
I think
deal with.
Sorry?
Oh, sorry.
Once again, I think it's better if we don't know, but I'll leave it up to Steve. Yeah.
No, it's great to hear that. I'm glad that we're thinking about him. So I'm definitely going to take that up with Steve.
Okay. So I think we are setting in motion something.
I may have killed the whole. Okay, shit.
Who knows? Maybe.
All right. Well.
Yeah.
Maura, do you have anything?
I was reading Bone Hunters just about the time I was reading I think Blood and Bone, and the one character which stood out to me as completely different is Spite, who is like a philosophizing nice lady at least in Bone Hunters, who has all these deep thoughts and all that, and here she's just crawling out of the dolmens and trying to grab the crippled god's flesh for her purpose and all that. So it was like a like a character whiplash. So I just wanted to ask you, like, what exactly is Spite? Is she that spiteful, or Steve just made her so sympathetic, or?
Well, you can read the first book of Carcanus series, and you'll find found out all about Spite and
No,
Lady.
I've read that. So
Yeah.
the spite of Karkanas tracks with the spite we see in Jakuruku and all that. But the one in Bone Hunters is like some outlier. Like I can't even recognize that it's spite.
Well, yeah, Steve and I have sometimes we have very different takes.
Yeah.
So I do think
on character.
even the Spite in the Bone Hunters is deeply motivated by her hate of Envy. Like, I'm here because I want to carry him to kill Envy, but I'm going to play the long con. And then the Hound comes along, and then they actually fight, and just like, I'm definitely going to kill Envy. And then she goes off to Jakuruku, and we see the whole thing. So
Yeah.
it tracks for sure.
She needs more power to take on her sister. So
Is that like a running joke that's like they hate one another so much that, like, through millennia, and regardless of how much they've changed, because Envy in Carcanos versus Envy in Memories of Ice versus Envy in Orbs of the Throne is very different. They still have this one underlying goal to kill each other. Is that like the running gag between the two?
well, it's their think of their names. I mean, and perhaps they were doomed by
That's true.
Draconis.
Yeah.
Perhaps he set this mark on them by doing that, and in many ways, he sort of saved everyone. Because imagine if they were allies. Imagine if they got together. I mean, it would be
Oh,
very.
That's a take
That's
I
a
haven't heard
scary
before.
thought, yeah.
That's a take I haven't heard before.
yeah.
Perhaps he was thinking ahead.
Yeah. I mean, it's awesome that they are rivals and not letting any of them gain power. So yeah.
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
good.
exactly. They're constantly tripping each other up, and so.
Lee?
One topic we've not touched upon at all is actually the guard. And
Yeah, the Crimson Guard. Yeah.
so, Maura, do you have anything to ask
Right.
about the guard?
Those were some of my favorite plot lines throughout all 6 books. I mean, all 5, because I don't think Knight of Knives, do we see Crimson Guard? No, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Yeah. I think it starts from Return to Assail. It was heartbreaking. And especially the way we see everything through Shimmer's eyes is just it was extremely nice. It was extremely heartbreaking to read, and I sort of predicted the theory, but then I got distracted by all the other stuff going on with the thaumaturgs and and the crippled god. So, but the Telan theory was there somewhere in my mind, but it was nice to have it spelled out clearly in Assail. Like I don't really have a question. I just appreciated it so
Yeah.
much.
I'm again. I'm think it's great to hear that. I feel vindicated in that. It's a tragedy. Their story is a tragedy, but it doesn't end in defeat. It just ends in transformation. But not for everyone. For them, I really had the Spartans in mind, a sort of an elite military, but in the end, a tragedy. They don't succeed at what they were trying to do, but they succeed in something else.
Even in return, I think it was quite obvious the way they were, the way the Telanimas were finding their whole war pointless.
In hindsight, it's very obvious.
I mean, I
and
got
then
it in
I missed it completely in my first read. It's like, okay, well.
No, because
So I think it's in Memories of Ice. You have one of Steve's epigrams is prelude
Lay of
is
Skinner?
where they are hunting down a Jagu mother, the Talan, and it's they corner her and slaughter her and her children, or she throws her children to safety, what she thinks is safety. And then after that, you have a short little epigram about from some historian talking about the glorious ancient wars and how magnificent they were and love. It's sort of, so you have this contrast between the ugly truth of slaughter and then this almost purple prose, highfalutin glorification of what had happened in the past as justification and all the rest. So that you have that amazing contrast. And so in their story, you see that in the Telanimas, that by the time we see them, that's all long past, and they've really outlived their purpose.
Yeah, because the Crimson Guard have the exact same reaction when they reach Unta as liberators. They think they are liberating the city from the imperial rule, and the whole expedition is quite pointless. So I think that was quite it was very parallel to what we see the Telanimas going through in Memories of Ice. So.
Good, and then we see some in that it's sort of the end of their story in the sale.
But at least it ends with Shimmer and Bars getting together. So
Mora was very happy about that. Yes,
a tiny happy ending. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe who knows how long it will last, but yes.
Oh God. I'm glad you're not going back to the Crimson Guard, because I can just imagine they have a happy ending and leave it there. No?
Yes, that's those little denouements of tying up and perhaps sending them off on a future path, which we don't know, but they're sent off on that, and their journey continues off stage.
Yeah. Lee?
So on the topic of the guard, since it's one of the main storylines in the novels and one of my personal favorites. So one thing I singled out a lot in, especially Assail, but also throughout the books, a big theme in the novels in general, from Night of Knives to Assail, seems to be grief, because you have, for instance, in Knives you have Temper, in Return you have from Possum to Shimmer even wondering about why they're here, to Kyle, to whomever, to Stonewielder, where we have Corlo, who's very poignant, and Kiska, who is searching about her master because she blames herself, to OST, where Traveler literally calls himself Grief when he's asked what his name is, to Blood and Bone and Assail, where the two most poignant POVs that I saw as punctuating this theme was Kaz and Shimmer. And I singled these two out specifically because you have two very different, like almost diametrical explorations of grief, because Kaz's exploration is external. We see Kaz through different POVs, from what have you, from like Possum to Kiska, or even Traveler or Kyle, to then Shimmer, who goes through a lot of different emotions, from why are you not doing anything to I'm gonna go out without you, and then fear of her commander. And then on the contrary, you have Shimmer, who is I like to oppose her with Shell, who is very hell bent on Malazans and don't touch me and stuff. Even when they're chained together, there's still animosity. And then Shimmer in return just kind of has that switch flick of like, why are we here? What are we doing here? We were this close to getting rid of this vow, which they weren't, but they didn't know that. And she comes to understand Kaz and his refusal to take on contracts, and just makes a truce with Shirley and leaves, right? Skinner gets disavowed, and they leave. And then the cycle begins anew of, what are we doing? Why are we here? What's our purpose? Do we want to find answers? Do we want answers? Do we need answers?
Mm-hmm.
And it is very, rather, not very obvious, but it's definitely present a lot in the sale, with her starting to lose emotion, her twist with bars because she wants to feel, to how Kaz acts and reacts, to Cowl teasing her and toying with her, to her dying. But I think even beforehand, you can see a lot of this exploration of grief through the guard in general, but specifically these two, about loss because they've died, right? About the loss of time that they experience, about generally, and there's a lot of imagery of family and tribe and all of that. Kaz, I think, brings up an analogy about wolves and sheep in Blood and Bone, about how a wolf society is a lot more structured than we think, and in truth, even us humans are all part of a family, part of a tribe. And then Shimmer asks him to come return to your tribe, and then after the sale, like, So I don't really realize. I'm not sure quite how deep this analogy goes, but I'm just really happy that I actually got to read it.
Yes, grief. I think we're working with emotions, and that's one of the most powerful, loss and grief, and we're dealing with issues like people. It's a brutal time, and there are hard choices that have to be made for survival, and out of that comes a very strong emotions, and we're trying to get that across. Right? And then for me, that poignancy is really one of the strongest ones, and so I think that one of the governing moods for the series, and the large series at large, or like Steve's Book of the Fallen, is it's elegiac. It's looking back on a lost period, and so there's that distance of time, and people are trying to make sense out of what happened, trying to understand the choices that were made, and that's what I think is one of the governing moods of the world itself, the whole series.
Yeah.
Sure. On the note of grief, since we're talking about it, one question I've seen recurring was, how did you come up with the role of the Lord of Tragedy? Because Dassam is...
Oh, how did I come up with what? Sorry?
Dassam Bray, the Lord of Tragedy.
I think it was Steve who actually originated the cult. But it's based on mythos, the old pre-Christian Roman cult, which was big among the soldiers then. And he was a martial figure, and the soldiers would ask for his protection. But it was, again, about loss. And if you think of contemporary series looking at soldiers and war, especially Band of Brothers, for example, there you have loss, you have friendships being broken, and the people in the field are beginning to see the tragedy of their position, beginning to see that they are sort of expendable in history, if you will. They might make history, but they'll be ground up and used up in it. And at the end, if they survive, they'll be broken and missing so many who they come to love. So that's December. That's the Lord of Tragedy. All of that's bound together in their response to Dassam. And we return to that, of course, in many, many ways. And for me, right at the outset, I had that right at the very beginning with Knives and Temple. That character sort of sums all of that up for me.
About the first sword, which we see in Knight of Knives at Keegetan, the formation of the first sword with temper, ferule, and the structure of the first sword. Was this like something from your games, or because that was extremely fun to read? The way the 6 people along with
the bodyguard, the first sword bodyguard, which are named after parts of a sword. Yeah.
Mm. That. So that backdrop.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask about that.
Yeah. I don't think so. I don't think that was part of the game. I went very different from what had actually happened in the gaming world, uh, especially with the first book of the Path of Ascendancy. This is the first. Well, when we get to Malaz, I guess it's the second one, and Wu setting up shop in Malaz, and then his having to establish control of the city first, and all of that. That is much more directly out of the gaming that we did originally, and so later on, Temper and the sword. Um, I think that's much more divergent from the gaming.
Okay. Yeah, it blew my mind when I read the Yigatan section in Night of Knives, all the flashbacks. That was extremely nice to read.
Yeah, I just hope that there's enough there. Because of course you do these things and then years pass and then you're hoping you can there's a line that it will line up, and you're just hoping you won't tread on yourself, so to speak, trip yourself up.
I'm gonna bounce off the topic. So since we're talking about Yigaton now, one thing I've noticed throughout is, depending on the book and the perspective, our perception of the claws in general, changes wildly. Like Temper despises them for obvious reasons. Then you have Possum as a POV in return, and then you have Kiska, who's also a claw, but she's pretty much disillusioned with the claw entirely. And then you have Topper being very sympathetic in Orbs of the Throne. And then we go back to BAB, and we have the guys being chased down by claws because they killed the face or something. And then Assail, and then you see Topper die, and we see Mal, and who is the Claw Plus, the Academy Claw. So I particularly like that, because in the Book of the Fallen, basically all we see is like a couple of claws, like Kalam, for instance, who is not even a claw anymore, and Pearl, and that's kind of it. And they're all kind of either arrogant, dickish-ish, or just not very sympathetic at all, or they're nameless and they die. Whereas here, it's much more nuanced. I think it's a lot more. That's one thing. There's a lot more POVs from claws, and but we also get a full story. We do see Possum and how he runs the whole thing, but we also see Kiska and why she's disillusioned, why she quit, because nepotism and competition within the claw, and how that can lead that rampant corruption and I don't know what the word is right now. The word is eluding me, but the whole factionalism within the claw, which eventually led to the downfall of Lassie in the first place, could bring the Empire to its knees, and how that organization could fail. But also, it's still very efficient. It's the covert military arm of an empire spanning 3 continents, and it still runs really, really well, which is one thing you can very easily lose track of reading the Book of the Fallen, where you see a whole bunch of claws that drop like flies. Here, you see, like, these people can infiltrate, like, palaces and kill rulers before a single sword is drawn. They can end the war immediately. So, I like that.
We didn't necessarily do it deliberately, but many times he'll pick up a facet of the world, for example, claws, and they'll be in there, but we might not get behind the scenes, and then I might be able to provide that then from my point of view, and then likewise, there might be something that I have in mind that I'm not dealing too much with, but he is able to pick that up and then show the inside of that facet and show it in much more detail and flesh it out. It's not necessarily all schematically set out, but it's nice
no doubt.
when we have an opportunity. It's nice when we have an opportunity to do that.
Yeah. I think all of the praise to Claw should all go back to Lassine. I believe that's what Lee is trying to say.
I'm not going to deny that, but I'm not going to confirm it either.
Well, they are stamped in many ways by her. She sort of set the template, and there are those who serving, who have power, and some abuse it. So that's just how they are. Your character comes out if you have those opportunities. So there are some players in there who are very disreputable and not there for good altruistic reasons. But then you have others who are actually, loyal servants of the cause, trying to do their best. So you have the full rounded experience of humanity.
One thing which sort of stands out to me about your writing is all the body horrors we see, all the depictions of. I mean, it was just that one scene in Stone Wielder, which I almost stopped reading Stone Wielder when the whole scene happened with Usu and Iron Bars. I mean, there was, I think, a couple of scenes before that, and Lee was quite disgusted reading that. And I said, it's just like surgery. The guy is anesthetized. It doesn't matter, He's just doing open heart surgery. And I was very casual about it. But the whole thing changes when it's iron bars. And I think I texted him saying that I'm just stopping the book here. I don't think I'm going to continue. Like, why did you have to write it like that graphically?
Oh,
Uh,
gruesomeness. Yes, we have to have that.
yes, yes.
Um, Dealing with bloody things, and I don't want to look away. And in fact, I want to get right into it. I was also criticized for having some pretty graphic body-based physicality things in Blood and Bone, where
Yes,
we have
yes, yeah, yeah.
well, it's a swamp, and you're starting to rot, and you have to show that.
Yeah.
It's our Stephen, part of our dedication to the grittiness side of what we think should be more of in fantasy, especially when you have people
Yeah,
running
I
around
mean,
with sharp objects.
no, that was great. There's leather starts rotting and all their armor starts rusting, and that was great. But it was the whole thaumaturg experimental temples which we see that
Hmm.
was, yeah, that kind of was nauseous. Honestly, it was,
Yeah, experimenting with the human body. Yeah,
yeah. Oh God, yeah.
On the topic of Blood and Bone, a few things I singled out during our podcast on Blood and Bone, which is coming out this Saturday, Sunday, and the next one, I think, was for one, Himatan feels like a character. Himatan is extremely oppressive. It's like the antagonist of two different arcs of Golan and like Shimmer until they actually get to Jackal Viharn. And at the very end, it's like Celeste goes and merges with Himatan, which is like, oh yeah, she is actually a character. And I think it talks to just how well it's written that essentially just a trek through the jungle with virtually no plot implications since they're just a scapegoat and a distraction can not only be so engaging as to elicit such great characters like Thorn and Golan, but also really sell the atmosphere of the whole thing. Because Himatan doesn't just feel like a character, Himatan feels like every character in Himatan as one. They're not like a hive mind necessarily, it's not like they think the same way. But people talk about Ardata, like, oh, Ardata this, Ardata that. In truth, it just feels like the jungle is killing them itself to protect itself. And the other thing I quite found fascinating about the thaumaturgs and their origins, and from Stonewielder there was already this notion of faith and how different faiths clash, but especially in Blood and Bone with the Shadow Wom and the thaumaturgs, how the smallest of differences, there is like a one witty quote about they would have discussions and debates, quote unquote debates, about which organ is necessary for life. They would argue the brain, and we would argue the heart, and just like he pulls out his heart and eats it or something to prove a point.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's how the smallest of disagreements can lead to such bright animosities.
hmm
And this is where my segue to the Sagula and the Moranth would be, but uh, I wonder if Mora wants to actually get into that.
We see that
No,
again
no,
and
go
again
on, go on.
in history, don't we?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, Himatan. I was thinking about the actual Himalayas. When you are traveling up into the high mountains and you're heading towards Tibet, Nepal, there are the locals would have legends and stories of that you're entering in. Leaving the physical realm and you're entering into the spiritual realm at those heights. And so those two worlds are overlapped, and you have manifestations coming out of the spirit realm and appearing in the physical realm, and you can meet them and talk to them. And I really wanted to try and evoke that sort of a environment of mythology where you might be tramping through the woods or the jungle or anywhere. It could be the desert, but you're also occupying a spiritual realm as well. And the spirits that are surrounding you, and they can talk to you if they want, or they can be friends or foes. It's another sort of older worldview, and it hasn't left us entirely. Of course, there's
Mhm.
many societies where this is still the truth, and even in Bangkok, in Thailand, you find that. It might be a Buddhist nation, but it's also has many superstitions surrounding that. For example, amulets, and you for self protection and good luck, you wear an amulet with Buddha. Now, Buddha himself probably wouldn't endorse that, but people are taking the faith in the directions that they want to take it.
Yeah.
So I really
mean,
love that rich life of spiritualism.
yeah, because yeah, me?
Well, might as well segue into the more intense Segula then. So, I brought up already this. I brought this up, but I really liked how I think it's both in Orbs of the Throne and in Assail where there's a running trend of the Malazans just not quite getting it, not quite understanding the culture clash and the enmity between peoples. Where you have in Orbs of the Throne you have the Morant and the Segula, in Assail you have the Tlanomas and the Iceblood/Dragon. And I think Timmel, the Primogenitrix, puts it up to Mal, where he's like, well, it's your fault this is even happening. And you're like, what do you mean? We're just here to do business. Well, your emperor reawakened the old war, and now we're dying again. So this is your fault, really. But they're like, no, it's not. We don't know what this is. And no SD, it's also, they don't understand, and it shows a lot, because they are like the commoner approach, the outsider approach to this feud. Because what the Morant and the Segula war eventually devolves into is a war of attrition into annihilation, because the two societies co-evolved so that they may survive one another, and they may destroy the other and ensure their own survival. And the Morant evolved, so to speak, into taming the quarrels or making alchemical munitions, while the Segula honed further their swordsmanship. And then 1 millennium passed, and then come along the Malazans, and like, well, guys, how about we use some of those munitions you have there? Well, that'd be nice. And the Morans specifically don't give them all of their munitions, and so the Malazans don't really have access to the good, quote-unquote, munitions, if you want to call it that. And then the Morans actually use them, and they're like, holy shit, what are you people doing? What is this? This is butchery, this is slaughter. And like, no, this is for our survival. I think that's what Galleon said to Torvald. This is for our survival. We're gonna destroy the city because the alternative is our destruction. This isn't the place to spare quarters. We don't bargain with a tyrant. It's not a mortal empire to bargain with. It's his experiment, really, because he's done it like dozens of times. And we've learned the hard way that we don't bargain with this guy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
it's all
I wonder,
set out,
yeah?
of course, right? In right at the very beginning with Gardens of the Moon. All right, that's the Siege of Pale,
mm-hmm.
And so it's one of the very first scenes, isn't it? And in it's the first appearance for the series. It's all sort of set out right there. These legacies that determine so many. Like, history is still present. Like, these animosities might go back centuries and centuries and centuries, but they haven't gone away. They are still with us in the present. Speaking of the Malaz world at that time. So while the Malazans have arrived in that region and it's quote unquote present day, but there is a layering of history that exists there already that hasn't gone away. It still exists for the people who were living there at that time. And I think you could almost say that that's more of a realistic approach to things. You just look out at our own world. It's exactly what you find. People just won't let go of the past, and they hang on to it. And these ancient feuds are still driving so much of what we see going on today.
Laura, do you have anything to add?
I sort of asked all the stuff I wanted to ask.
Yeah, I think we probably should save a few questions for the future.
We covered it for now.
I think since our next project is probably going to be tackling Path to Ascendancy or Kirkanas, depending on how we see.
Oh, just one last question, if you don't mind. Which one of Steve's books do you think is your favorite among all of Steve's books?
Well, I really have a warm spot for Gardens of the Moon because he and I originally did that as a screenplay, and scenes in it, like the fete, the party, scenes were gamed by us. So I have a real warm spot for Gardens. Although I know a lot of readers feel that it's the weakest in the way, but then it's
No,
the
no.
first. Right? So when you start something, you're not going to be a pro at it.
Yeah.
You get better as you go, and you sort of learn what you're doing. But I think Toll the Hounds is also very interesting in that it sort of has everything in it. It's all the different aspects of the world are together in Toll, and it's almost like a précis to the larger series. So it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I think yeah, those were my favorites too. I mean, Gardens, as you say, because it was an introduction to the Malazan. I mean, I don't know people who say things like it was it's not so rereadable and stuff like that. But it was a great book. It was a great that was the one which caught my attention. So yeah, thanks. All right,
Well,
should we start winding up?
yeah, I believe our next project was going to be Path to Ascendancy or something thereof. So we may be back together soon, I hope.
I think we should. If you would come back, after we read
You're
the
always
Foot of the
welcome
High
here,
Mage, maybe.
for sure.
Sure, after. Absolutely. That's definitely possible.
Excellent.
Thanks so much for the invitation.
No, thanks for joining
it's
us.
great to
It was
talk. Although it's been so long and I can't remember everything.
That's
oh,
okay.
absolutely.
That's okay.
No worries.
Yeah, I mean, at least Fourth of the High Mage, I think we'll have questions and
Yeah.
yeah.
All
we'll
right,
see.
great.
But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
In
Bye.
any case, this has been Lee. I have been Nora. This has been author Ian Esslemont. Thank you, sir, and we will see you next time. Have a good night.